the road feels lonely at times.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even imagine being in a situation where you're worried that your family won't understand or your friends won't understand, because I feel like at that time when you were struggling, mental health wasn't really in discussion yet as much as it is now. So even though that road felt lonely, like even you just sharing that right now, I'm sure is bringing others like a sense of peace and knowing that they're not alone in those feelings as well. So that's really helpful. And even as we reflect on Hagar's story, I can't help but think about how her wilderness moments and your wilderness moments that you've experienced are, have connections there. Hagar found herself in a desert of sorts, feeling abandoned and lost herself, but God met her in those moments of abandonment. So how have you seen God show up in your life during your own wilderness moments?
Yeah. The wilderness is a hard place to be in. And it feels like those 40 days.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's those 40 days that you see repeatedly in the Bible.
Yeah.
They spent 40 days doing this. They spent 40 days in the desert or whatnot. It can feel like 40, 80, so much more. Even though it's a couple hours, a couple days, maybe a week. But it feels so long and so lonely and so dark that like you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. You don't see the city just over the hill.
Yeah.
It's
It's more of a mirage. You think you're getting there, and then it kind of just gets further and further away.
Yes. Yeah. Or another storm comes in and you're like,
Sure.
so close.
Yeah, that's not fun either.
But I would say I've experienced God like several times in my wilderness moments. And I would say there's moments where I still feel in the wilderness, but here's a sunflower, of like, here's hope, take another step. Here's a little more hope, take another step. It's not you're immediately out of the wilderness per se, but it's the hope to keep going. Because like I said, anxiety lives in your body for a while. And so even if a trigger response has subsided, or you've like are finally getting sleep, or you're finally eating again, like your body is still feeling it. So the wilderness can feel a little bit longer than it feels mentally maybe, which was something that took me a while to learn, is like, I'm supposed to be feeling better. How come I'm not feeling better?
Yeah.
And my pastor and my therapist have been like, because your body is still feeling it. And you just have to give your body time.
Okay.
It's like when you have surgery.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a healing
the cancer's
process.
taken out.
Yeah.
But now you have to heal. And so it's the anxiety has been removed a little bit, but your body's still having to heal. As I said earlier, like losing those couple people in such a short span of time, it really was hard to like see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And like try and see what God was going to do with those hard times, because you always hear like God doesn't waste anything. He'll find a way to use it for his good and for his glory. And I was like, how are you going to use suicide for glory? Like there's no way. And I think honestly, at least for me in my experience, he used it for glory to have real conversations with my parents. And for my parents maybe to understand like this isn't a joke. Not that they ever took it as a joke.
Yeah.
But like when I would speak out, they would actually be like, okay, wait, yes, let me listen to Rachel.
Yeah.
And instead of it just being like a passive conversation where they'd be like, oh, Rachel's crying again. Like, I don't know how to help her. They'd be like, yes, Rachel, like, how can I help you?
Yeah, how can I help you?
You know, like it made it, they were more responsive to me when I needed help.
Sure.
Which I really appreciated. And also two of the people being my dad's friends. And my dad is someone who's very strong, doesn't show much emotion.
Classic firefighter.
Yes, classic fireman. Like to see him soften also made me feel like it's okay to be weak and not alone.
Sure.
So I think that was really healing. And I've seen God in that moment of wilderness being like, I'm going to bring this family together and help them understand one another and be there for each other when I don't think that's necessarily happened before.
Okay.
In that way, you know?
So you're kind of being able to see these moments in hindsight of like, wow, this was really difficult, but I can see now that I'm through it and I'm in my healing process of the journey, I can see how the Lord is working in those moments of pain.
Yeah. I mean, and even in the moment too, just being like, oh, I can cry. Mm-hmm. And my family's going to receive that. Yeah. There was another moment where I had a bad anxiety attack where I was driving to work and this was after everyone had passed away, that I was driving to work and I like got overcome with anxiety and I just started crying and I was in a school zone and I'm like, I'm going to run over this curb because I have like so many tears in my eyes. I'm like losing control. I did not want to run over the curb, but like school was getting out. I'm in the school zone. I was like, I need to pull over. And so I pulled over and I think I passed out. I can't really remember. I just remember all of a sudden like gasping for air. And I called my dad thinking he was nearby. Yeah. He's a fireman and maybe he'll know how to help. And he couldn't come immediately in the moment. But he was like, there's a fire station up the road. You can go there. And I was like, okay. And so I like called my now husband, but like my boyfriend at the time. And he came and helped me and picked me up and took me over to the fire station. And when I tell people this story, they think it's so funny that I'd like rather be at a fire station than be in a hospital or something. But I'm like, I was raised there. Sure. And like, though this isn't my dad's department, these guys knew my dad and like called him on his personal cell phone to be like, we have Rachel. She's okay. She's like, she'll be here until you get here kind of thing. And so just to be like, okay, like God is like working. You know, he's placing certain people to come into my dad's life, into then my life, that like in these moments, I feel so safe, you know, versus I think some people might not experience that where they maybe do have to go to a hospital, which feels really sterile and not full of love, you know, versus being like, I'm at a fire station. This feels like home. And these people know my dad. Like they literally just welcomed me in.
No questions
the door.
Asked.
Yeah. And, but also with all of that said, like I saw so much of God's character in Blake in that moment. Like Blake came to me, Blake cried with me, Blake prayed for me, Blake did anything he could to make me feel better and say like, this is going to be okay. And I think that's like a reoccurring thing is I see a lot of God through the people around me. And I think that's on purpose. Otherwise, it feels so isolating. But to see God and the people around you makes you want to stay with the people around you. You know, otherwise, I would fall back maybe into that old coping mechanism of isolation.
Yeah.
You know, and so I would say in the wilderness, like I've seen God the most in the people around me in those situations.
Yeah. Where it may seem like a wilderness, God will send, like you said, those sunflowers, those, whether it's a person or like a gust of wind that you can just feel his presence in the spirit. It's those moments where we're like, okay, I feel grounded. I may feel like I can't ground myself, but that's like the grounding moment. Yeah. That's really cool. I'm glad that you have those people. I was wondering when you were going to bring Blake into it because that's something I've seen too is, you know, as a friend group, we've all been so curious to see who the people are that would come alongside us and love us for who we are, because we've done that for each other. But that is something that I see in him is as you've gone through this, we can't always be there for you. So Blake is a person who I've just seen be so good at that job of like constantly being there for you and understanding you and working to do, you know, doing the work to understand you. And that's just really special in the person that you've chosen to be with you for the rest of your life. Yeah. So that's such a blessing.
I know. He always asks, he's like, how did I get so lucky? And I'm like, because God knew.
Yes.
God knew we needed each other for whatever reasons.
Even Hagar, when she's looking back in that moment of God asking him to trust her, the angel asking her to trust God, and that her child would go forth and bring blessings and power and show her God's power. And actually, speaking of that, Hagar named God El Roy, meaning the God who sees me. And in those times when you felt most alone, you talked a little bit about how you felt God's presence in the people you were around and the things that happened in your life. I know that you felt his presence, but there are times where you really felt like maybe in your loneliness that God was seeing you.
Yeah. I feel like he always sees me. Right now I'm actually in a Bible study where we're talking about the garden, and it's all talking about coming back to the garden, right? And just how like the church as a whole will be like, God created the earth and God created man, and now here's the fall. But like what actually happened with our relationship with God from when he planted the garden. He didn't speak it into existence, but he planted it. And then he breathed on man, and like how close we had to be, and how Adam got to name the animals, like being like, is this going to be a great partner? No, the elephant's not going to be a great partner. Like, and keep going that they like eventually were like, we have to make, God was like, I have to make someone that's going to be a great partner for Adam. And then he made Eve. Right. And just like how he spent the time with them. And like, yes, once the fall happened, God never lost sight of them when he asks, where are you?
Yes.
Right. He knows exactly where they are. It's more of like, who told you you were naked? Who told you that you had sinned? Who told you this? You know, and that's what God's saying when, where are you? You know, it's a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
And so.
Silly humans. I know where you are.
If you learn where we get our humor from, it's God.
Yes.
But just that, like, he's never lost sight of me when I've felt anxious, you know? And I still think sometimes in my anxiety, like, where am I? What, like, how have I gotten here? But God's still being like, I'm right here. You're not lost. I still have you. And so in those ways, I definitely feel seen. But then going back to the idea of, like, God using the people around me, I'm very thankful to be in a church right now where, like, the pastors are very open about also like their mental health journeys and their anxieties and whatnot. And so I've had different conversations with them. But throughout summer, we were doing the book study of Philippians, which is known as like the book of joy, and how joy is mentioned like over 100 times or something in just like the 4 chapters. And so they ended up doing a whole sermon on anxiety and how they've personally experienced anxiety, but how God deals with our anxieties too. You know, it's like God, your father, just coming next to you and being like, I still love you, you know, and like it being like just for your ears.
Yeah. Yeah. Even in this big room of people, I see you still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And another like specific time that has brought so much healing to me is in the most random way. Like, people say the world is small, and it really is.
It is. It really is.
I'm at a friend's wedding in Texas, and it's one of my friends actually from Poland that was on my team. And I had connected with her sister-in-law a little bit throughout the couple days we were there. And she's like, do you know this church? And I was like, I know of that church. And I was like, I don't go there, but I know the pastor there who's like the new pastor at this church. And it is the pastor whose wife had passed away from suicide. And that's brought a lot of turmoil to me because it's right after she had a baby, basically. And there's a lot to the story, but just the overall idea of Blake and I are wanting to start a family.
Yeah.
And if I already have this existing anxiety, what am I going to turn out like that? Right. So that fear comes back of, am I going to be like that? Is my anxiety going to do this to me? Am I going to get in this mental state? So I get so fearful of it that then that causes more anxiety. And so I was like, she's like, do you go to this church? And I said, no, but I know the pastor at that church. And she was like, oh my gosh, like, I just have to like reassure you that his new wife is one of my childhood best friends. And she was like, all I could think about was God has prepared her whole life to step into this role. Like, she is the best person to now join this family. And like, God will use this. And I just like started crying because she had no idea how much I needed to hear that. Of just like, these kids are now being taken care of and God is still working for his glory. right? And he's redeeming this story and not leaving these kids without a mom, not leaving Chris without a wife, not leaving this church without like hope, you know? And so that was like just another situation where like she knew nothing about how much I knew the story, what I was feeling around this story, that she just like spoke life into it. That I was like, okay, God's funny. You know, of like, he just knew like I needed to hear that.
Yeah.
And so I had gone home and to therapy, and I told my therapist this, and she's like, God is just like, here's your healing balm. You know, like he's just handing me like healing after healing after healing when it comes to like my anxiety in those ways.
Yeah.
And so that makes me feel so seen, because it's just like no one would have known what to say,
Sure.
but they knew what to say.
Sure.
When I'm feeling anxiety, I'm like, why? Why, God? Why am I going through this? Like, surely you're not working, you know? And then for him to be like, I'm working. And like, just like put it right in front of my face, that it's like, how can I question him again?
Sure. But we do. And I think that is our nature. It's our fallen nature. And it's something that I'm thankful that even though we do, he continues to see us and give us grace in those moments. So I hope that, you know, as we age, we're getting closer to being like Jesus, where we can recognize those moments before they happen and be like, no, I'm not going to get to that point. I'm going to practice knowing that I'm seen first before I get to that point of it.
And that's something specifically I'm learning in therapy.
Okay.
And of just like, here's the lie, but how do you replace it with the truth before your anxiety runs with it?
Yes.
Before your anxiety runs with the lie or with this false identity that God didn't give to you, right? But what is the identity he gave to you, or what is the truth he has spoken over you? And how do I implement that before my anxiety spirals?
Yeah.